Thank you. All right. And now it is my pleasure to bring on stage somebody that all of you know very well, one of the great entertainers in America, Sarah Silverman. As we begin, I want to thank Sarah for the great support she gave my campaign. And I want to thank Sarah for speaking out on issue after issue of importance in this country. You know, there are a lot of entertainers out there who make a lot of money and they're well known, but they don't have the guts to get involved in important issues. Sarah does. Thank you, Sarah.
Keep my overhead low. I guess, Bernie, the first question I should ask is something that's been on everybody's mind since the election, which is, what the fuck?
Is that the entire question?
It was, but I could keep going. Like you said, I feel like the Democratic Party, like the Labour Party in the UK as well, has drifted from its core mission as the voice of the working class,
right? You got it.
So my question is this. Do you think that is partly why we got our smug smiles wiped off our faces on Election Day?
Yes. The short answer is absolutely yes. Look, we have an absurd, and I can tell you this without even being condemning my fellow Democrats. People, you cannot believe the amount of time people spend simply going around raising money. That's what people do. So when we have a Democratic caucus every Tuesday, when somebody says, okay, we need a lot of money, Joe, I want you to go out to, LA, and I want you to go to New York City, we got to do fundraisers, we got to raise a lot of money. And that's real stuff, because to run a campaign costs an enormous amount of money. But in the midst of all of that, there is never a discussion who has gone out to a low-income area in New York City and talked to the working class people there. There is never any discussion of that. So this is not, and you're right, the British Labour Party had exactly that same problem. We cannot be the party of the liberal elite. We cannot be that. We must be the party of diversity. We must fight to see more women get elected to various offices. We must fight to see more African Americans and Latinos and members of the LGBT community. But what I said in Boston last week or 2 weeks ago, which got me into a whole lot of trouble, but let me repeat it again. Okay? Not bad getting into trouble. It is not good enough to say, okay, we're going to support this candidate because he or she is black, or she's a woman, or he's gay. Not good enough. We want people, white and black and Latino, we want people involved, but they have to have the courage to stand up to the big money interests today who dominate the economic and political life of the country. And Sarah, there was once a time, back in the 30s, you would ask the average working person which party you were affiliated. Well, of course, it's FDR's party, it's Harry Truman's party. That is not the case today. Very few people with a straight face will tell you that the Democratic Party today is the party of the American working class. And as I just mentioned up there, a lot of people are suffering, a lot of people are hurting. And they need a party which brings them into the process, which stands up for them, which has the guts to take on Wall Street and the drug companies and the insurance companies and the fossil fuel industry and all of the powers that be. That's the party that we need to develop.
You bring up the liberal elite, and it makes me wonder, because I know that when you say that, you're talking about a very you're talking about elitist people. But in terms of the word liberal, which has been a good word, a bad word, one of those words like feminism that has very different definitions depending on who you talk to. I grew up very liberal. I consider myself liberal. A lot of people think that being liberal is an ideology that only people who are financially secure can afford to have, and I happen to disagree with that. I come from New Hampshire. I come from a working class family and friends who I've seen struggle and be frustrated and angry and struggle to find work and be out of work, and still none of them would trade on the freedom of the well-being and freedoms of other people. So here's a question. Where is the line between trying to truly understand the angst and the anger of a growing white nationalist sect while fundamentally rejecting their racism and hatred? There is something to understand that we need to understand, but it's a weird fine line right now, right?
Well, I mean, racists are racist, and we have to fight them every step of the way. But as I mentioned earlier, I think it is wrong to think that most of Trump's supporters are racist. Many of them voted for Barack Obama not once but twice. I don't think, I think, let me just jump to tell you what I see the difference. I prefer to be called a progressive. I don't.
Okay.
And the reason for that is.
Me too now.
Okay. Many of us, we are liberal with pride on issues of combating sexism, racism, and homophobia. On that, we are liberal. But you have many liberals who are not progressive when it comes to taking on Wall Street or fighting for a trade policy that works for American workers. So I think what progressivism is about is accepting all of the fights that liberals have engaged in to create a diverse society, a non-racist society, but at the same time, what a progressive stands for is understanding that this country, in many respects, is moving toward an oligarchic form of society, and that you have a handful of billionaires who control our economic and political life. And if you are not prepared to engage in that struggle, well, I don't think you're doing serious politics.
That makes sense, but I think we're living in a different time than, there was a time I remember that people would go, well, I'm fiscally conservative, but on the social issues, I'm liberal, and like you said to Spike Lee, that you think, well, a lot of the people that voted for Trump, they weren't voting for his racism or his misogyny, they were voting for his promise of jobs. But can you separate those things if they all come in one package,
Well, I think that what you're talking about is developing a political strategy. And what the political strategy is, we will not compromise one iota on racism and sexism and homophobia. This country, as I mentioned, we have struggled too long, and we're not going to give an inch on that. On the other hand, I do believe, because I've had this experience in Vermont, where I go with a lot of people who say, Bernie, I disagree with you on gay marriage, I disagree with you on, abortion, but I support you because you're out there fighting for my family. So I think we have to understand there are areas where people will disagree. But essentially, where we, as I started my remarks, overwhelmingly the vast majority of the people support a progressive agenda. Sarah, they want to see pay equity for women. They want to raise the minimum wage. They want the rich to start paying their fair share of taxes. They want their kids to be able to go to public colleges and universities tuition free. Our job is to bring people together around a progressive agenda, not tolerate racism for 1 second. But there may be instances where there will be disagreements. Not everybody's going to agree on every issue. But essentially, I think what the Democratic Party needs to be is a party that brings working people in, that does not shut the door, that brings young people in. We saw in our campaign so much incredible energy that this country desperately needs. Bring them in. Let's get them in.
talking a little bit about Standing Rock, and it's so it feels like such a black and white issue. I mean, they wanted to put the pipeline in a rich neighborhood, and the rich people said fuck no, and they went okay. So people don't want it. It's not healthy. It's not good for water. It's just simply wrong. And what do I not understand that Obama isn't doing something about it? I feel there must be something I don't understand. You know, we know that this is something that is only happening to keep big oil relevant. It's so just definitively wrong. So is it that he doesn't have the power to say no? What is it?
You've asked me, I don't, I'm not here to speak for President Obama, but let me just say this. The issue, I agree with you, is pretty clear. Issue number one is this country, our government, has been trampling on the sovereignty rights of Native Americans for hundreds of years. And this is another example of that. Number two, there is growing concern, obviously in California, but all over this country and all over the world, about limited fresh water. And you do not want to, it seems to me, endanger the drinking water of millions of people by having a pipeline that, if it burst, would in fact destroy drinking water for a whole lot of people. And third, and most importantly, is either we decide that we're going to become more dependent on fossil fuel, or we decide what is right, and that is we have to break our dependency on fossil fuel and move to sustainable energy and energy efficiency. So for all of those reasons, I have written and requested that the president kill the pipeline. We put a lot of pressure, and many of you in the room did. And again, this is where grassroots activism plays a role. We put a lot of pressure on the president to kill the Keystone Pipeline, and he did. And I would hope very much in the last several months of his administration, he will have the courage to kill the Dakota Access Pipeline.
Don't know what he's waiting for. Talking about campaign reform, obviously, I've been dying to ask you this. Well, obviously, Citizens United needs to be overturned. People should be registered to vote as soon as they turn 18. There's all these things. This is something that doesn't make sense to me. Why is it more? What kills me is not having to, not being able to have seen you debate Donald Trump, and and it makes sense to me as a voter that it would behoove voters if candidates did cross-party debates before there were one final nominee on each side. If we got to see you and Hillary debating Donald Trump and Ted Cruz and Marco Rubio, whoever was left standing at that point, people would be able to make actual decisions. The candidates wouldn't be just talking along party lines. Why doesn't that happen? That would be so helpful.
Actually, that's something we suggested early on. I mean, it just didn't happen. We did suggest that we thought it would be, exactly as you said, we thought it would be a really good idea for a bunch of people, different parties, to get up there and have a freestanding, freewheeling debate. There is, you touched on a lot of issues, and I mentioned a few of them when I was speaking. I worry very much about the future of American democracy. Because if you think Citizens United is bad, and it is horrendous, it is horrendous not only because it forces billionaires, it allows billionaires to be able to buy elections. You know what it also does? The good guys got to spend half of their life raising money in order to respond to that.
Not this guy.
Well, that's right. We did it differently. Yeah, actually we did. And one of the things that I'm very proud of is, that's right, we didn't do any big dollar fundraisers. We didn't do any. And I think at the end of the day, what the Democratic Party is going to have to conclude is that it is better to have 5 million people chipping in $50 apiece than it is to go to the big money people. All right?
cooperative model. I mean, Standing Rock alone, I was thinking about it, it's like that's proof of an oligarchy. It's people with their own self-interest forcing us to need them.
What is going on, and again, you don't see this discussed very often, but let's just talk about it for a second. I'll give you, I mentioned the example right here. We pay the highest prices in the world for prescription drugs. That's the fact. We pay twice as much for many drugs as they do in Canada, maybe more than 3 times what we pay in the UK. And the pharmaceutical industry has hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of lobbyists in Washington, D.C. They spend huge amounts of money on campaign contributions. What happened here in California is the clearest example. Can you imagine the drug companies spending $131 million to defeat a proposal that would lower drug costs here in California? $131 million. That's called oligarchy, all right? When you have Wall Street, whose greed and recklessness and illegal behavior drove this country into the worst recession since the Great Depression. Listen to this. All of the major Wall Street financial institutions, each and every one of them paid billions of dollars in fines to the federal government because of their illegal activity. Billions of dollars. How many of the executives on Wall Street were prosecuted for illegal behavior? Zero. Former Secretary of Treasury, Tim Geithner, under Obama, where is he now? You know where he is? He's on Wall Street. All right, it goes on and on. Trump is now talking to somebody from Goldman Sachs to become Secretary of Treasury, which is nothing new. Democrats did that as well. That's called oligarchy. That's called power. When the folks on Wall Street can get the top-level positions in the Department of Treasury. And fossil fuel industry, the same thing. You want to talk about oligarchy? How many good programs do we see on network news dealing with climate change? Answer is not a whole lot. Do you think it has anything to do with the enormous amount of advertising that the coal companies and the oil companies do on television? I do. What we have to recognize is that you got a small number of incredibly wealthy and powerful people who know how to manipulate the government, know how to support candidates with large campaign contributions, know how to lobby them with hundreds of well-placed lobbyists. These are the people who are dominating our economy. They're dominating our political life. And if we don't get our act together, we are going to move rapidly, even more so, into an oligarchy. That is the struggle of the moment in my mind.
Well, it kills me because you have been begging people to pay attention to the dwindling middle class, losing jobs to deregulation, globalization, jobs going overseas. And politicians, dare I say, Democrats, did not listen. Then it got boiled down to Hillary versus Trump, and a lot of voters went with the racist who promised them jobs.
Right.
Now...
But let me be clear. Let me back this point up.
Okay.
Under which president was NAFTA passed? Anyone know?
Bill Clinton.
What is Barack Obama's view on the TPP? He supports it.
Why? Regulation, I don't understand why people think that regulation isn't for the people. The reason for it is to protect people. Well, so to deregulate something like trade and make it so it doesn't be
this is an example, and trade is an excellent example. The people who write the trade regulations, the trade bills, whether it is NAFTA or CAFTA or PNTR with China or the TPP, these are the most powerful people in the country, Sarah. This is the major corporations who would much prefer to hire people in low-wage countries for pennies an hour rather than employ people in this country for decent wages. These are the drug companies who want to make sure that they can force countries around the world to pay top dollar for drugs and not allow those drugs to become generics. You have incredible power going into writing this legislation. And the truth is that over the years, there have been Democratic presidents who have not had the guts to stand up to that power. And that's just the simple truth. I wish I could tell you otherwise, but, you know, it is not to condemn everything that Bill Clinton did or everything that Barack Obama did. They did some damn good things. But when it comes to issues like trade, under Bill Clinton, we deregulated Wall Street. Robert Rubin, you remember, was the Secretary of Treasury, coming right out of Wall Street. And there are many economists, and I would agree with them, who think that that deregulation led to the excesses of Wall Street and led to the terrible breakdown that we saw and all of the pain that that caused in this country.
It's hard to come together when... I'm sorry, you're about to clap for him.
That's it.
Like, okay, Pema Chodron, I don't know if I'm saying her name right because I only just read her. So she says, and it's about life, but it's also about social action and stuff. She said, you can't think of your thoughts as facts. You have to think of them as opinions. The second you think of your own thoughts as facts, you go towards other people with other thoughts with aggression. And I try to keep that in mind and stay open and go towards people with love so change can happen. But how can change happen if the people who need to listen, the people who voted to get jobs and now could be watching the guy they vote for bring Goldman Sachs and all these people into the fold, but they're not watching. They won. They're back to watching Dr. Phil.
No.
I know that's... No. I'm not being my best self.
Okay. You know, one of the things, you know, running for president does do is it allows you to get around the country and meet and see a lot of people. And Sarah, what I just want to tell you is I don't think it's that simple. You know, again, if you are living in a community where all the jobs have gone in a rural part of America, and many of you have driven through rural America, and you see downtowns all boarded up, schools closed down, virtually no jobs for the kids, and you hear the Democrats talking about how they're for the working people. What do you think? Do you think you believe that? You don't believe that for a second, right? So all that I'm asking you is there are a lot of people out there who are decent people who are hurting, and they have not gotten the kind of attention and response that they should from the Democratic Party. For example, just give you an example. Democrats had done nothing else than raise the minimum wage to a living wage. Those people would have known whose party was on their side.
Yeah.
All right. Why is it, you know, that the idea, and I introduced this, you know, concept in my campaign, to make a very simple point. There is one major country on earth that does not guarantee health care to all people as a right. Do you know how different this country would be if everybody in America had comprehensive health care as a right? It would transform tens of millions of lives. Why are we the only country? I live 50 miles away from the Canadian border. They have had a single-payer system there for decades under conservative government, progressive government, doesn't matter. It's widely accepted. It is far more cost-effective than what we have. So, Sarah, people are saying, you know, I can't afford health care. I don't have a job. My kid can't go to college. No, I don't trust the Democrats. Our job is to stand with those people. They won't believe us until we take on the big money interests.
That's inspiring.
It's not inspiring, but what I just don't want you to think, because a lot of people do think that, as, you know, all of Trump's supporters are some kind of idiots. They're not.
No.
They're in pain and they are hurting. And we damn well better stand up for them.
Right. I know I'm not a real news person. I shouldn't try to be all CNN or anything, but are Jews people?
All right, enough of that question. Now the next.
I mean, I think what Trump did is he took people's very valid fear and anger and he gave them a place for it, and that place was other. Mexicans are
That's
rapists.
right.
Muslims need to go. And, you know, a lot of very successful scapegoating in this election.
Yes.
And it was terrifyingly reminiscent to me of just about everything I learned in facing history and ourselves.
Let me jump into just a minute.
Please do.
All right.
I had nothing.
You know, I think what history is about is just what you're talking about. When people are hurting, one of two things happen. Either that justified anger and frustration that people are feeling can be directed to the causes of the problem, all right? To why we don't have health care for all, why we have lost millions of decent paying jobs because of bad trade policies. We can direct our energy to try to resolve those issues, or else we could do what demagogues historically have always done, and that is to scapegoat people who are in worse shape than we are. Funny story, I mean, not a funny story, but it tells it all. In the 1950s, the lowest paid white workers in the United States of America were in Mississippi. What did those white workers have? They had the opportunity to drink at a white-only water fountain and have it over African Americans who couldn't drink at that fountain. In other words, what the ruling class was able to do is say to you, yeah, you don't have any money, you can't afford to send your kid to college, you don't have any health care, but look at that guy who's black, and your job is to hate that person. And that is the story of history in many respects. That's what goes on. And our job is just the opposite. It is to bring people together to try to understand why we are where we are today. Who is responsible? Is it some Mexican American who's planting crops here in California? Is that the reason why people have lost their jobs going to China? Is that the reason why people can't afford their prescription drugs or they have no health care? Certainly is not the reason. So our job is exactly the opposite of what demagogues do. Demagogues try to blame and scapegoat minorities and poor people. Our job is to bring people together and focus on the real causes of the problems.
Yeah, when the election was over, I was so filled with fear, a crippling fear, and an anger, and looking to blame. And I thought, wow, all those core feelings are the core feelings that motivated people to vote for Trump. They did it out of fear and anger, and I thought, well, that's something we have in common. And, but we do have to see each other as the same, or change can't happen, I think. But then you go, well, you have to get angry and protest in the streets. But, you know, the weird thing is, what makes me scared is this, okay, my first boyfriend that had a house, he put up an American flag. And I remember going, what are you doing? And he was like, I'm putting up the flag. And I was like, why? And he goes, because I love America. And I was like, oh, yeah, me too. And then I went to my car and I called my sister and I told her and I said, why am I freaking out about this? And she goes, oh, Sarah, Jews have an innate fear of nationalism. And I was like, right, that makes sense. Look, I love America. I really do love America. I love our freedoms. I love being able to speak up. I love everything about it. But this USA #1 thing scares me innately. You know, it's like #1 in what? Juvenile diabetes? Why do we need to be #1? What I'm saying to you is, you say, why don't we look at other countries where things work out, where people have health care?
Right. All right, here's what I think. Hard to quite answer Sarah's questions, but
I've never interviewed someone before.
Now you tell me.
I said, what questions should I ask just specifically that you want me to hit? They're like, whatever you want.
Yeah, you're doing great.
He's such a pro.
Let me just tell you a very personal story. My father was born in Poland, lived in incredible poverty, terrible area, Jewish, anti-Semitism, etc. Came to America, and he wasn't political, but he became an enormously proud American who loved this country because he had 2 kids who went to college, and he lived a life never in a million years could he have lived in Poland. And that is the story of everybody here. That's the story of many, many millions of people. You have every right to love this country. And the other thing about loving one's country, and where that love, patriotism sometimes is distorted, often is distorted. But the love of country, think about all of us trying to come together, and I sense some of that, a little bit of that in my campaign. We had people, black and white and Latino and Native American, Asian American, gay and straight, women, old, young, coming together and saying, we can do it. We can create a nation in which we have the best educational system in the world. Why can't we do that? Do we not have great teachers out there? Can we not create a great healthcare system? So I think one of the problems with globalization, above and beyond the economics of millions of jobs in this country being lost, there's also a loss of control, okay? If China has a recession, we lose jobs. And people say, what the hell does that mean? What did I do? Why did my boss have to fire me because China had a recession? We can't control what goes on. And I think what happened with Brexit and what's happening a little bit in this country, which is not a totally bad thing, is that people, I don't know how many of you have get to Vermont. There's a town called Windsor, Vermont, in the southern part of the state. And they had a little museum. It's a small town, 3,000 or 4,000 people. And they had a museum there, and they were showing the products made in this tiny town in the 1850s. They were making furnaces and sleds and guns. They were making manufacturing in a tiny town. You had all of these workers coming together. And right now, I think people, it's not only the economics and the lack of income, there's a lack of sense of purpose. We're buying everything from China and every place else. Why aren't we manufacturing it down the street? Why aren't our people learning the skills? Why aren't we having that sense of community that maybe once the country had? So love of country means it could be, and it's, in Vermont we have that. We're such a small state. They have the towns where everybody knows each other, and they have the potlucks, and they have the town hall meetings. It is a beautiful thing. It is a beautiful thing. Kids are not ignored. People know everybody. That is a good thing. As a nation, I think that's the kind of direction that we have got to move in. And I feel very... No.
I like to switch the circumstances around in my head to try to keep myself honest. I go, okay, if Hillary was president-elect with the electoral vote and Trump won the popular vote but lost the election, how would I feel? What would happen? How would people react? Well, Trump voters would probably demand a recount, and I would be saying, oh, but the Electoral College is good because it represents each state, and blah, blah, blah. And I go, well, gee, that's not what I'm saying right now. And then I go, well, I guess we're just like them. And then I go, Sarah, don't talk like us and them. It's all of us. And then I go, yeah, that's true. We're all the same.
How'd you like to be inside her head?
We're probably all the same. And then I'm like, well, I'm not like them. And then I'm just like, what am I doing? And I find a Law and Order marathon and take a nap. But my question is there value to, and I think I know the answer to this, and yet, is there value to having an attitude of us and them, or must we have to look at it as all of us together? And I would guess the latter, but in terms of protest and taking to the streets, I don't know, is there a question in there?
Well, I think, there is an us and a them, but it is not, black versus white versus Latino versus people born in Mexico or something. I think the us is the vast majority of the people who want to have our kids grow up decently, be able to get a good education, to have good health care, to breathe clean air. Those are the us. And that happens to be the vast and overwhelming majority of the American people. And the them happens to be people today. And I think it's just simply true, whose greed is just without control. They want it all. And, if you are the Koch brothers and you're worth, 80 and 90 billion dollars, you would
They're
think,
probably so happy.
you would think that would be enough, but they are working day and night to destroy Social Security and Medicare and Medicaid, take away the rights, the economic rights that people have fought for many decades. And frankly, I don't understand. It's hard for me literally to understand why people are motivated to do that, but they are. There is a world out there. It's I think, a sick world, frankly. I think, we all have friends or family members who are dealing with alcoholism, we're dealing with drugs, and I think this greed is addictive as well. They need more and more and more. And they cannot control themselves, and in that constant greed and the desire for more wealth and more power, they are doing terrible, terrible harm. And aren't many of them, but they have just unbelievable power. So for me, the us and them is they are the them, and kind of we are the us.
I'm so titillated by you calling it an addiction. Years ago, and I could say it was before the bank, it was in like 2007, my very good friend and mentor, Gary Shandling, who passed away, and today is his birthday actually, but he said something exactly like that, and I'll never forget it. He said, greed is an addiction, and the people who are controlling our money are addicted to greed, and it's as if you gave a bunch of cokeheads a pile of coke and said, distribute this evenly among your people. It's very exciting to hear. Should have closed on that. This stuff, like Trump refusing to show his taxes and Trump not putting his businesses in a blind trust, it seems that the only reason that isn't illegal is because no one's been that big of an asshole before to say no. He clearly has interests in other countries that would affect how we feel about it, and to know those relationships would be important. It's almost like when rollerblades became popular, there weren't any laws about rollerblades. People rollerblade through the mall, and then people would trip and fall, and there'd be lawsuits, and then they had to...
I'm trying to follow you.
I know. I gotta digress, but I think what I'm saying is, then they had to make a law. You can't rollerblade at the mall.
I look at it.
That did kind of make
And while
sense,
we're on
right?
roller skates, let's...
Like, do laws need to be... Why is he above the law? Why does he seem so beyond reproach with this shit? Billy Bush lost his job, and his job doesn't even matter.
Let me respond in this way. When I was a kid, I had a pair of roller skates. Yeah. Look, for whatever reason, Trump has rewritten the rules of politics. And that's just simple. And you would have thought on one of a dozen instances or 20 instances, when he said something outrageous, you say, oh my God, it's all over. Well, it wasn't all over. All right. And I think the lesson to be learned from that is that we also have got to rethink politics as well. That means that we don't go around insulting people or making fun of people with disabilities. That's not what we do. But we really have to define our role in a democratic society. And we have to, and I know this is a hackneyed expression, we are very, very powerful if we choose to exercise that power. And a lot of people don't. A lot of people do not make demands upon the system. Half the people don't vote, and then people vote every 2 years or every 4 years. You have the right to demand a lot of the world in which you live in. But unless you stand up and make those demands, nobody hears you. I mean, I've said this a million times, that if we had a large demonstration of 2 million young people marching on Washington saying, make public colleges and universities tuition free, in days, public colleges and universities would be tuition free. No doubt in my mind. Because politicians, on many things, they're not dumb, and they're saying, okay, these guys caught on, they know what we can do, they want us to do it, we better do it, or we're not going to get reelected. Not much more complicated than that, okay? But that's what we have got to do. What Trump said, it doesn't matter. I can curse out people, I could be a misogynist, it doesn't matter. What did he say? He said famously, somebody on Main Street, it doesn't matter, all right? Well, we have also got to be thinking about the roles that we can play, not in an insulting way or a petty way, but exercising our democratic power, of which we have a lot of. Let's figure out how to use that power.
No, I did that. Well, we should get to some of the audience questions. I just want to say, in a country
I thought
where...
those were the audience questions.
Those are my questions.
Those are your questions.
You
Now we
think
got
there's
5 minutes.
a load of rollerblading?
That's for the audience. All right.
What, are you busy? You have someplace to be? I just went on by saying, so many people of power are living unconscious lives. People never talk about therapy and empathy and the things that ultimately are the most important things. Anyway, there are big leaders with a lot of power living very unconscious lives, entirely motivated by ego. These are sleeping people, and among them there is you, who is totally consciously, with your eyes wide open, entirely motivated only by the well-being of people.
Let me just say this. Thank you. There are a number, I'm not going to say a huge number.
There are some good ones.
There are some very decent people out there. You never heard of them. They're never on CNN. I know them. They work, 14 hours a day fighting the right fights. All right, so you got any questions there?
We got some questions from you assholes. Let's see. Oh, these are just extra thoughts I had. Bernie, you only had your merchandise was only American made, and I respect that. Yeah. But it was, in full disclosure, very stiff and itchy, and I bought mine from Etsy. Anyway. Well, we've touched on this, but this is an important question, which is, what is the importance of Standing Rock on a humanitarian level? I mean, you did touch on this, so maybe you want to...
Well, on the humanitarian, it's, as I said, it's an issue of climate change. It's an issue of the dignity of Native American people. It's an issue of protecting our water supply. The Native American people have been, lied to and cheated from day one. No question about it. And the situation in many parts of this country for Native Americans, not all, but many parts, is really dismal. And one of the things I certainly had a hope to do if elected president was to radically change the relationship of the federal government to the Native American people. That's something that has to happen.
Man, I wish you were president. I agree, but because these are your questions, and people like to be mirrored. Okay. I've never wanted, thought, expected to ever be politically engaged, but you have convinced me otherwise. Thank you for instilling hope in the political system once again. Comment? Okay, let's see. I wish people put their names on. I give them shout outs. All right. What are practical, effective strategies for us to move forward a progressive agenda? For example, do online petitions even make a difference? That's a great question. How do we as citizens ensure a free and independent press? Two great questions.
Yes, online petitions have an impact. Give you just one example. A few years ago, virtually all of the Republicans in Congress and too many Democrats wanted to cut Social Security. We worked with senior organizations, with some of the unions, some of the veterans organizations, some of the disability organizations, and we presented millions of names to the leadership in the Congress. Social Security was not cut. So the answer is yes. When politicians are facing the reality that millions of people are aware, a politician's dream is that they can pass major legislation without you knowing anything about it. All right? And that happens very often. I mean, the bigger the bill, the less coverage it gets. But when people are aware of what's going on, the overwhelming majority of the American people will oppose cuts in Social Security. In fact, they want to expand Social Security. So if people are mobilized, we will win that fight. If they're not, Republicans will be able to do what they want. So the answer is yes, petitions do have an impact. The second part of that question was?
How do we as citizens ensure a free
All
and
right, now that is, let's stay on that one for a moment. The last chapter in the book, remember the book? We're here for the book. That's all right. Thank you, Sarah. All right. This is a very unusual book presentation discussion. Because we forgot to talk about the book. Okay. The last chapter deals with, it's entitled Corporate Media, a Threat to Our Democracy. It's a strong language. And what it is first of all, we have to understand, many people think, well, television is objective. They're going to do their best to try to present all of the information. Television, corporate media is owned by corporations. Very large corporations who have their vested interests. CNN found out, for example, that getting Trump on television during his campaign, time after time, saying outrageous things was really good for ratings. People say, I can't believe that guy said that. And they watch CNN, they watch CBS, and so forth and so on. If you talk about the real issues facing the country, and you can't do it in a 3-second soundbite, not so good for TV. Second of all, you have advertisers who spend a huge amount of money on TV advertising. You ever see those crazy drug company advertisements that tells you if you take the drug, all these terrible things are going to happen to you? It amazes me that anyone ever buys that drug in the first place. But they pour hundreds and hundreds, if not billions of dollars into television. Do you think that maybe might explain why television does not discuss why we pay the highest prices in the world for prescription drugs? The truth is, and studies indicate it, I'm not just saying that, people who study these things tell you, very little coverage about climate change on television. Why is that? Well, it has a lot to do with the power of the fossil fuel industry and their advertising. So the question is, corporate media by definition, you have trade policy, which is almost never discussed on television because all of these corporations love the trade agreements that we have. So what we're going to have to figure out, and I use Sarah as an example. Sarah, how many people do you have in your social media?
Oh, 9-point-something million.
But what we have got to do, we also have something like 10 million, I don't know. She's very competitive. We don't actually, but I want to say. But what we need to do is to figure out, and I'm open to any ideas that people have, how we educate, how we get ideas out that are not gotten out on television. For example, most Americans don't know that we are the only major country on earth not to guarantee health care to all people, not to have paid family and medical leave, that we have the highest rate of childhood poverty, that we have the kind of grotesque, they do studies on this, and they say, well, what do you think the distribution of wealth in America is? And people, well, you know, rich have a lot. People have no clue about how bad it is. And when they hear how bad it is, they say, wow, that's wrong. But people don't know a lot because you're not going to get important information from watching TV. So we have to figure out how we have an alternative media. There's some people out there. I was just on a program with Amy Goodman last night. Amy does a great job. And, you know, people like, you know, I did brunch with Bernie with Tom Hartman for a long time. And there are people who do a great job, but we got to figure out how we develop our own networks, which bypass the corporate media. What's the answer?
Someone just said I have the answer.
Well, there's a lot that has to be done, but it's something pay attention to. All right, pay attention to that very, very important issue. Because right now, I mean, ask yourself another question. In a nation which is politically divided, where Clinton got 2 million votes more than Trump, why is it that almost all of talk radio is extreme right wing? Why is that? You have cities where Republicans get 20% of the vote, and yet there is no progressive radio station. Is that the case here? Okay. All right, you know, and as citizens, we have got to begin. I mean, you want to ask an area how you can get engaged? Talk about corporate media. Demand that progressive radio get on the air in LA and San Francisco and so forth. Those are things that we can do.
Start a new party, Bernie. Come on.
Join, go to Our Revolution.
Well, they're trying to do something there, right? Our Revolution, which came out of our campaign, supported many, many candidates and won most of them. We won some really, really wonderful victories. There'll be some really good people in Congress.
Progressive party. We'll knock around some names. And read this book, and I suggest the audiobook, which I enjoyed very much. You can listen to it on 1.5, and you can get through it in 17 hours.
All right, I think we're coming to the end, are we not?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know, you want to get to all of these? There's a whole mess.
We're not going to do that. All right, let me just...
Bernie hit a wall.
All right, let me just...
If only there was money in truth.
Well,
if only truth was sexy. You are.
well,
Okay.
Bernie, speak about prison industrial complex, please.
well, go to the book and no, there is a whole chapter on an issue that you're touching on, which desperately needs reform, and that is a broken criminal justice system. And the point that the gentleman makes is there are people who run private prisons, and getting more and more prisoners is how they make money, which is why we have got to end private prisons in America. All right, let me just conclude by getting back to the book. The second half of the book does talk about criminal justice reform. It talks about immigration reform. It talks about the need to have a progressive tax system in this country. It talks about how we can move to a single-payer national health care system. It talks about immigration reform. It really goes into some length and depth about some of the crises that we face as a nation. And that's the kind of debate I think we need to look at the real issues and come up with some real solutions. All right, last point that I want to make tonight, and I want to thank Sarah for being here. This is a moment in American history, an extraordinary moment. And the future of this country depends upon what you do, and what all of us do. And our job now is to be extremely, extremely smart. And that is to figure out how we mobilize millions of people who share many common values, and how we stand together to defeat the ugly parts of the Trump agenda, and how we move together going forward with a progressive agenda. This is not easy stuff, but I think we can do it. But the first thing is we need to jump into this fight. And I would hope that all of you will become engaged in whatever way you think makes sense. But you need to be engaged. You cannot sit back and throw your hands up and think somebody else is going to do it for you. These times are too serious. All right, let's go forward together. Thank you all very much.